What's up guys, Josiah Martin, and today I'm in Seward, Alaska, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the GoPro Hero 9 and the iPhone 11 Pro. We're talking specifically about the cameras on these guys, which one's better, and if you already have this one in your pocket, do you really need this one? Also, I apologize, it started raining on us, but it was much better when I was trying to get this information out to you earlier. What's up guys, Josiah Martin here in Seward, Alaska, and also inside of the boat. Also caught in a very crazy storm. We got some huge swells going on right now. I'm wanting to tell you guys about the iPhone 11 and the new GoPro Hero 9, but that's gonna have to wait for just a second. So let's talk about the main difference of these two cameras is that this camera does shoot at 20 megapixels. And this camera, the three on the back are only 12 megapixels. So you're not getting as much megapixels out of this camera, but with its amazing processing and HDR capabilities, can it stack up with this camera? Now the photos that I'm showing you to compare, I'm actually using the wide angle lens on the GoPro, which is a 13mm lens. The GoPro is actually a 16mm lens. So the iPhone actually has a slightly wider focal length than the GoPro. But the benefit of having this iPhone is that you actually have three cameras in one. So if you want a 50mm telephoto lens, you can actually zoom in, or if you want the standard 26mm lens, or also a wide angle 13mm lens. So it's nice having that flexibility to switch between lenses, while the GoPro, you only have one focal length. Well, in just a second, I'm gonna be comparing the live photo mode with the live burst mode on the GoPro, but we're gonna talk about that back in the studio because we are kind of getting rained out here. So I'll see you guys in 1 second. Okay, we are now back at my house, safe and sound, and also dry. That was quite the adventure, and I got a lot of really fun photos to share with you guys, but it was not a great place for actually doing the talking head part. So without further ado, let's talk about these live photos and burst mode. So the GoPro Hero 9 has this new feature called a live burst mode, which essentially is as soon as you press the record button, it actually captures 1.5 seconds before you push the button and 1.5 seconds after, leaving you with 30 photos. So you can then go back and pick the best frame, or you can even save that little photo clip as a 3-second video. Now this totally blew my mind when I pushed the button and went back and looked at what happened, because it captures before you even push the button. How does it know? It has a rolling memory, so it's actually constantly recording and capturing images, and then as soon as you press the record button, it stores that information on the SD card for you. This is actually a great feature for fast-paced sports because you never know when the action is going to happen, and all of a sudden it happens and you push the button and I missed it again. So this actually allows you to have a chance and get 3 seconds worth of photos to then let you pick the best photo. There's also a burst mode on this, which impressively captures 25 pictures per second if there's enough light to take that many photos. Or you can get a burst of 30 photos in just 3 seconds, which would essentially be 10 frames per second. So quite a few different burst features that you can set up. There is just an auto function, so depending on the light outside, you can just press the button and it'll give you 10 photos or 30 photos. Because of right now, it is such a pain for me to go into the menu and edit these. Like, I'm tapping on this darn screen and it won't work. Hopefully with the new firmware update, this touchscreen will become usable again. But right now, a lot of the times I'm actually having to go into my GoPro app and change the setting on the camera before I can even use it, which is an extreme pain. I'm currently running version 1.21, so if you already have the next version past that and the touchscreen is amazing, I'm happy for you. So when you are doing the burst mode or live burst mode on this GoPro, you're capturing 12 megapixel photos. So it is a lower quality image, but because GoPro is taking so many of them, it can't be full res, otherwise it wouldn't be able to compute and crunch all that data onto your SD card. And as far as the iPhone goes, it also has this live photo mode, which honestly is how I take 100% of my photos. If I'm able to, I just take the photo in live photo mode, because if you miss the shot or someone blinks the eyes, you can then go back and change the key photo. It does the little HDR processing and it produces a really nice looking photo. Now this is also taking photos at 12 megapixels. It does not have the 20 megapixel photo capability, but even when you're taking live photos or burst photos, it's capturing 12 megapixel photos, so you don't have to worry about that. And there's no limit on the burst mode. I tapped that shutter button and pushed it off to the left and held it for 30 seconds and got bored after taking 300 photos. So essentially you're able to take 10 frames per second indefinitely, I'm guessing, and then you can go back into all those photos and pick the absolute best frame and delete all the rest. Maybe. So the burst mode and live photo mode are very similar on the iPhone. It's essentially the same thing and produces very similar results. It's just taking a 3-second video or taking a burst of actual photos. So I've really been enjoying taking that 3-second video and then finding the best frame in there and making that my key photo, because over 3 seconds, there's a lot of different things that can happen, and the photo at the beginning can actually look way different than the photo at the end. So actually you could be taking more photos than one with just the one click of a button. So that's what live photo or live burst mode do on these things, but which one's actually better? As far as quality goes, it's nearly a wash. From all the examples I've looked at, they're both 12 megapixel cameras. It really matters most about the conditions and lighting that you're shooting in. If you're taking photos in low light, both of these cameras do not perform well in burst mode. Now, if it's a bright sunny day and daylight outside, then you're gonna have some nice sharp photos, but as soon as you zoom in on these photos, it quickly loses detail. Now, if you're wanting to edit this photo later, the iPhone photo does fall apart a lot quicker than the GoPro. It does stand up a little bit more to editing and alterations in software like Lightroom. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about the waterproof capabilities of both of these cameras. This one is rated at 10 meters down, which is 33 feet. You can go down pretty far, and the iPhone's rating is 2 meters up to 30 minutes. So you could sit in the hot tub and get a little water on it, or you could even take it out to the ocean and get some cool photos, but you're not going to be wanting to do any extended amount of time in the water with this phone. However, I have seen some people online do some pretty miraculous tests with this phone, taking it 10 feet underwater, 27 feet underwater, and they left it there for 30 minutes, brought it up, everything was functioning perfectly normal. 8 months later, everything still worked. The one thing was that the speaker seemed a little bit more dull, not quite as sharp or loud as it was before I went in for the dunk. So that's something to keep in mind. But ultimately, I'm not gonna be playing in the waves with my $1,000 smartphone. I have a lot less to lose if I run around with this GoPro taking some photos. So at the beginning of the video, I mentioned how this is a 20 megapixel camera and this is only 12. It is such a big marketing scheme right now to play up the megapixels. They wanna get these big numbers, and more megapixels means more better. But does it? It's not just about how many megapixels there are, it's also about the quality of those pixels. So if you have 10 megapixels that are really good and 20 megapixels that are just average, that 10 megapixel photo is going to look better. Now, if you zoom in really far, you'll start losing the details on that image. But if you zoom in on the 20 megapixel photo, there might be more detail there. But if the detail is full of noise and distortion, then it doesn't really matter. So megapixels are important, but also the dynamic range and the sensor size and the color accuracy of those pixels means a lot more. So the sensor size on this iPhone 11 is 1/2.55 inches, and the GoPro 9 has a sensor size of 1/2.3 inches. So the GoPro does have a slightly larger sensor size, but not by much. And iPhone's HDR capabilities and software that helps enhance their photos is truly impressive. So at side by side, at first glance, these photos look very comparable. But I think the GoPro does win out because it can shoot in RAW. Now, there is an app you can download that does allow you to shoot in RAW, which would help you bring back more of these details. But I'm not gonna go into that today. GoPro can shoot a RAW image, and then you can put that on your computer and edit it later, and it does retain an impressive amount of information to then bring those shadows back up and bring the highlights down a little bit. So the dynamic range of the GoPro is adequate. I'm not gonna say impressive, but it is adequate. You can pull a lot more of this details back from the sky. Okay, so now let's shift and talk about low light photography. As I just previously mentioned, both of these cameras has very small sensor sizes. And a small sensor means that less light is able to get into the camera. Now, the GoPro has an f-stop of 2.8. while the super wide angle lens on the iPhone is at f-stop 2.4. So with that wider aperture, it is able to let in slightly more light, but if you switch it to the 26mm lens, the 1x lens on the iPhone, it has an f-stop of 1.8, which allows even more light in. Well, I'm sorry I don't have anything more exciting to photograph for these low light tests than my bedroom, but it was dark in there and a great test for these cameras to see how they perform in these low light situations. So the iPhone wide angle lens does not work very well in low light. As soon as you switch it to 1x mode or the primary lens on this camera, it works very well. And if it's really dark, you can put the long exposure mode on the iPhone up to 3 seconds, and it produces an even brighter photo with a lot more sharpness and clarity, and maybe even too much. You can see here on this pillow, it looks like someone turned the clarity slider up a little too much. But for low light on a smartphone, amazing. Now the GoPro, on the other hand, was brutally disappointing. You take this camera, and I was shooting it in RAW, handheld it with a max ISO at 400, and it took the photo. Not only was it a really dark image, but I was having a hard time in post bringing back any of the information. The shadows were too dark and just was not able to capture that information in the photo. But then I switched it into night mode, and there's an auto shutter feature, so I just stood as still as I could to take a night mode photo. Now the shutter only went off for about a second or two, and if you look at the result, it is brighter, but because it's handheld, the image is kind of blurry. Now GoPro even says this right there on their website, that the night mode is not meant for hand holding. So I pulled over my tripod and I set it up, and I took a 5-second exposure, and bam, the whole room is lit up super bright, actually almost too bright. But now I can take this raw image and edit it and bring back the highlights a little bit, and you have this really detailed image. Now, if you do zoom in, you can see that there is still quite a bit of noise in this image, but not nearly as terrible as taking a regular raw photo on this camera. Now, if you are in night mode and taking long exposure shots, make sure your max ISO is capped out at 100. No need to bring your ISO above that, just make your exposure a little bit longer to compensate for the dark scenes instead of boosting your ISO, which produces a lot more noise on this small GoPro sensor. So because I'm comparing a raw image with this processed image on the iPhone, it's not exactly fair because the raw gives me a lot more information to then edit in post. Now, if we're just looking at both of these images side by side without any processing, the GoPro image comes out a little bit darker, but then you can turn up the shadows in post and bump up the exposure. So I have to give it to a GoPro in this category. It definitely wins in low light if you're going through the trouble and hassle of shooting in RAW and editing it afterwards. So the main thing that I'm taking away from all these tests is that the iPhone 11 is an amazing tool, and it's already right there in your pocket. When you take a photo, it does some amazing HDR processing to bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, and give you a really clean, nice looking image. Now, if you're wanting to edit that later, you can play with the shadows and highlights a little bit, but not nearly as much when the GoPro shooting in RAW. Now, I think the big draw of the GoPro is that you can get amazing results with minimum effort. You have the GoPro, you take the photo, bam, wow, it's amazing. But I'm getting very similar wow factors with the iPhone straight out of camera. Now, as soon as I put both of those images in the Lightroom software and start editing them, it is clear that the iPhone just does not have as much information to process, and the image does break down. On the GoPro, I can certainly push the shadows, bring the highlights down, and alter the image significantly more with the information that is captured in RAW mode. Now, one category that the iPhone is a clear winner in is portraits. iPhone has done an amazing job with the portrait mode on this camera, collecting information from multiple lenses to blur out the background and have a really sharp focus on the subject. Now, you can see YouTubers like Sawyer Hartman put the iPhone 11 right next to his 1DX Mark II and show his friends both of the image and have them see which one they think is the iPhone. And actually, most of his photographer friends were thinking that the 1DX Mark II photos were actually the iPhone photos because they didn't look quite as good. So it's amazing what Apple has done with this smartphone in portrait mode. You can see here I took this nice photo, put a little filter on it, and bam, it's ready for Instagram. The GoPro is much more suited for wide landscape shots or having you the center subject with a bunch of other details in the background. So truly, this GoPro Hero 9 is not gonna replace my GH5 as my photo camera, but it is nice to have this small waterproof camera to toss in my backpack and take along on some awesome Alaskan adventures. And I actually have some really great tips on how to get the most out of this GoPro Hero 9 camera in this video right here. So go ahead and click on that to learn more about this GoPro, or you can check out this video right here. But either way, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with the Alaskan Outsider. I hope I can help you get the most out of your photo and video gear while encouraging you to get outside, stay creative, and you can be an outsider too. We'll see you in the next video.